Betrayal didn't ask for permission in my life. It arrived with a suitcase in my hand and the door locked behind me. He stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes cold, the same eyes I once helped with homework and driving lessons, and he said it plainly, without anger, without shame. "This is my house now. You need to leave." My wife had been buried 3 days. 3 days after I watched dirt fall on the woman I loved for 28 years, her son looked at me like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. No shouting, no argument. No tears from him, just a calm decision that cut deeper than any scream ever could. I nodded, not because I agreed, because I understood something in that moment. He thought I was finished. The street was quiet when I dragged my bag to the curb. Suburban calm, trimmed lawns, flags on porches, the kind of neighborhood where people wave and smile and pretend nothing ugly ever happens behind closed doors. I sat on the edge of the sidewalk for a long time. Cars passed. No one stopped. That's how humiliation works. It's loud inside you and invisible to everyone else. My wife's name was Linda. She was warmth in human form. The kind of woman who made strangers feel safe. We met later in life, both carrying history, both careful, both tired of games. Her son, Michael, was 19 when I met him. Quiet, watchful, protective in a way that always felt slightly territorial. I respected it. I never tried to replace his father. I never forced affection. I paid for his college, helped him get his first car, sat in the audience at his graduation. I thought respect would grow. It didn't. It waited. Linda owned the house, bought it long before she met me. I never asked to be on the deed, never needed to. I believed in partnership, not paperwork. We agreed everything we built together was shared. We talked about wills. She said, "Don't worry, you're taken care of." I believed her. That was my first mistake. The second was underestimating how quietly resentment can age. Michael was 26 when she died. A man, not a boy. A software job, nice clothes, polished manners in public. He hugged me at the hospital. He cried on my shoulder. Performance is a strange thing. The night after the funeral, he sat across from me at the kitchen table. Same table where Linda used to place coffee every morning without asking. Same chair where she used to lean against me while reading messages on her phone. He cleared his throat. He didn't look nervous. He looked prepared. He said, "I think it's best if we make some changes." I waited. He said, "This house has always been my mother's. She wanted me to have it." I didn't argue. Not because I didn't care, because I wanted to see how far he was willing to go. He continued, "You're still young enough to start over. You'll be fine." He was wrong on both counts, but I nodded. 3 days later, he changed the locks. That's how quickly family can become furniture, something you move when it's in the way. I stayed in a cheap motel off the highway that night, the kind that smells like old carpet and lost plans. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, listening to trucks pass, and for the first time since Linda died, I felt anger. Not loud anger, the dangerous kind. The quiet kind that thinks. I didn't cry, I didn't call anyone. I opened my laptop. Linda and I had run a small consulting business together, nothing glamorous. Financial cleanup for small companies, payroll issues, compliance messes. The unglamorous work people only appreciate when it's done right. She was the face, I was the engine. Michael never paid attention. He thought we were helping people with spreadsheets. That ignorance would become important. I started going through old files, old emails, old contracts. And then I found something that didn't belong. A document Linda had scanned but never filed. A draft will, not the final one, but close enough to tell a story. It named me, not Michael. I sat back. Interesting. I kept digging. Bank records, trust discussions. Notes Linda had written for her lawyer. She had planned to protect me. She just didn't live long enough to finish. That wasn't betrayal. That was interruption, and interruptions can be corrected. Michael had already started posting pictures online, smiling in the living room. New couch, new TV, caption, new chapter. People commented with hearts. They didn't know he had thrown out the man who built that chapter with his mother. They didn't know because he never told them. I watched. I waited. That's something age teaches you. Speed is for people who still believe in fairness. Patience is for people who understand systems. I called Linda's lawyer not to complain. Not to accuse, just to ask questions. He was hesitant, professional, careful. Then I mentioned the draft will, silence. That kind of silence tells you everything. He said, "I didn't think you knew about that." I said, "I think Linda wanted me to." Another pause. He said this may be more complicated than your stepson believes. I smiled, not out of joy, out of recognition. Michael had moved fast, too fast. He hadn't checked all the doors before slamming mine shut. And in life, when someone rushes to take something, it usually means they're afraid someone else has a better claim. I rented a small apartment near the courthouse. Walking distance. Not for convenience, for observation. Every morning I walked past the building. Every afternoon I sat in the cafe across the street, watching people enter, watching people leave. Michael didn't know I was watching. He didn't need to. This wasn't about confrontation. It was about positioning. Linda used to say, if you want peace, prepare for the storm quietly. I finally understood what she meant. Michael filed paperwork to transfer the house fully into his name. Clean, efficient, confident. Too confident. He assumed I would disappear. Men like him always do. They mistake silence for surrender. They mistake age for weakness. They mistake kindness for blindness. I let him. I spent weeks doing nothing visible. No calls. No visits, no messages, just patience, just planning, just letting him settle into the comfort of his mistake. One afternoon, I saw him outside the courthouse, laughing on the phone, relaxed, light, free. He had no idea that his freedom was temporary. He had no idea that his confidence was built on an incomplete story. He had no idea that the man he pushed onto the sidewalk was not done standing. I didn't hate him. That surprises people. I didn't want revenge. I wanted balance. There's a difference. Revenge is emotional, balance is mathematical, and life always respects math. I started preparing documents, statements, proof, not to attack, to present. Because the strongest moves are the ones that don't look like moves at all. Michael thought he had won. He had no idea the game hadn't even started. Michael didn't come looking for me. That told me everything I needed to know. When people feel even a small trace of guilt, they check, they ask. They pretend concern. He did none of that. He replaced the locks, posted his pictures, and moved on. That's not confidence. That's dismissal. I walked past the house one evening. Not to go in, not to confront, just to see. The porch light was on, new plants by the door, a delivery box sitting where Linda used to leave her shoes. He was already rewriting the space. I stood across the street, hands in my pockets, and let the weight of it settle. Grief and betrayal are different animals. Grief makes you empty. Betrayal makes you sharp. I was sharp. Linda and I used to talk about legacy. Not money, not property, impact. She said, I want to leave people better than I found them. I told her, sometimes the best lesson isn't comfort, it's consequence. She would smile at that. She would understand this. I met with the lawyer 2 days later. His office was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet built to protect secrets. He folded his hands and chose his words carefully. Your wife expressed strong intentions, he said. But intentions aren't always enforceable. I nodded. I'm not asking for charity, I'm asking for clarity. He slid a file toward me. Linda's notes, handwritten, emotional, direct. She had written about wanting me protected, wanting stability, wanting fairness. She had written about her son's temper, his entitlement, his tendency to assume. That last word stayed with me. Assume. He assumed the house was his. He assumed I was weak. He assumed silence meant defeat. The lawyer leaned back and said, Your stepson has already filed to assert sole ownership. I smiled again. I know. He looked surprised. I said, that's good. It gives us timing. Timing is everything when you're patient. If you move too early, you look emotional. If you move too late, you look desperate. I had no interest in either. Michael's job was downtown, high-rise. Glass walls, modern furniture. The kind of place where people talk about innovation and drink expensive coffee. I went there once, not to see him, to see the environment. People say environments don't matter. They're wrong. Power always behaves differently depending on where it feels safe. He felt safe there. That was important. I started reconstructing our business records. Linda had been meticulous. She believed in order, in backup, in proof. Michael never paid attention to any of it. That was my advantage. There were transactions, investments, shared assets. Business income that had quietly paid for house improvements, renovations, the deck, the kitchen, the garage conversion. Legally, it mattered. Emotionally, it was devastating. That house wasn't just Linda's, it was ours. Michael had erased that with one sentence and a new lock. I didn't confront him, I didn't text, I didn't email, I let him settle. People are most careless when they think the danger has passed. Weeks went by. He hosted friends, loud music, laughter through open windows. I watched from the car once parked down the street, not with jealousy, with calculation. He was comfortable. Comfort makes people sloppy. One evening I saw him arguing with someone on the phone in the driveway. His hands were sharp, his voice tight, the mask slipping. I didn't hear the words, I didn't need to. Power always reveals itself under pressure. Linda used to say, "You can't hide your nature forever." Michael's nature was starting to breathe. I received a letter in the mail from his attorney, formal, polite, cold. It stated that I had no legal claim to the property and requested that I cease any attempts to interfere. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was premature. He was nervous. People don't send lawyers unless they're afraid of something, and fear always means uncertainty. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a folder marked Patience. That folder was getting thick. The lawyer and I met again. He had reviewed everything. He had opinions, strong ones. He said, "Your stepson may have moved too quickly. There are procedural gaps, and your wife's business involvement complicates the narrative." I said, "Good." He raised an eyebrow. "Most people would say unfortunate." I said, "Most people want peace, I want truth." Truth is heavy, but it lands clean. Michael started acting differently after that, more cautious. Less public, fewer posts, no more house photos. He had sensed something. That was good. Uncertainty makes people make mistakes. I began to hear things. Small-town quiet has its own network, the cafe near his office. The dry cleaner, the gym, people talk, not because they're malicious. Because they're human. He had told someone I was unstable. He had told someone I was confused. He had told someone I was having a hard time letting go. Projection is a funny thing. It reveals more about the speaker than the subject. I didn't correct him. I let him build his version of me. The more fragile he made me sound, the more shocking the reality would be. Linda would have called that poetic. One afternoon I received an email, short, from Michael. "Can we talk?" No apology, no explanation, just control. I didn't respond. Silence again. 2 days later, another message, longer, softer. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I smiled. The word misunderstanding is often used when someone realizes they may have miscalculated. I still didn't respond. Power shifts quietly. He began calling, once, twice, 3 times. I let it ring. When I finally answered, my voice was calm, neutral, almost tired. He said, "I just want to clear the air." I said, "The air is clear." He paused. He said, "I didn't mean to hurt you." I said, "Intent doesn't change impact." He said, "We're family." I said, "Family doesn't change locks." Silence. He swallowed. I could hear it. He said, "We can figure something out." I said, "You already did." And I ended the call. That moment mattered, not for drama, for balance. He was no longer in control of the conversation. And men like him panic when control slips. The lawyer filed quietly, strategically. No spectacle, no announcements, just documents placed in the right hands at the right time. Michael would receive them soon. I imagined his face when he read them. Not angry, confused, that's worse. Confusion cracks confidence. That night I slept well. For the first time since Linda died, I slept without weight on my chest, not because I had won. Because I had begun. The papers reached him on a Thursday. I know because he called me at 9:14 a.m. not once, not twice. 7 times I didn't answer, not out of cruelty, out of discipline. When someone panics, the worst thing you can do is comfort them too quickly. Panic reveals truth. I wanted to see his. By noon, my phone was full, missed calls, voicemails, messages that started formal and ended messy. The first voicemail was controlled. "We need to talk, this is serious." The second was sharper. "I don't understand what you're trying to do." The third was tight. "This isn't necessary." By the sixth, his voice had changed, faster, thinner, exposed. That was the sound of a man realizing the ground under him wasn't solid. I listened to all of them. I didn't reply. I went for a walk instead. The courthouse steps were warm under the sun. People moved in and out, carrying folders, carrying problems, carrying hope or fear depending on their story. I sat on a bench across the street and watched. This wasn't revenge. This was gravity. Michael had assumed everything would fall toward him. He forgot that gravity works both ways. He showed up an hour later. I saw him before he saw me. He moved differently now. No confidence, no casual pace. His shoulders were tight. His jaw locked. He scanned the area like someone looking for a threat. I stayed still. Let him feel that discomfort. He didn't see me. He went inside, that was fine. He would come out with less certainty than he went in. Linda used to say, watch how people walk when they think they're winning, then watch them when they're not sure. I smiled at the memory. An hour later he came out, slower, head down, phone already in his hand. He called me again. This time I answered. Hello, I said. His voice was strained. Did you file something? I said. Your lawyer can explain. He exhaled hard. This is unnecessary, I said. So was locking me out. Silence. He said, you're trying to take my mother's house. I said, I'm trying to tell the full story. He said, she wanted me to have it. I said, she wanted me protected. He didn't reply. I said, those two things are not the same. He swallowed. I could hear it again. He said, we can settle this. I said, you already tried to. He hung up. That told me more than any words could. People hang up when they lose position. That evening I drove past the house again. Lights on, curtains closed, no music, no laughter. The quiet had returned, not the peaceful kind. The nervous kind. I didn't feel joy. I felt alignment. When something is wrong and it begins to correct itself, you feel relief, not excitement. Michael was learning, not through lectures, through consequence. He showed up at my apartment the next day, unannounced. That takes either courage or desperation, usually both. I opened the door slowly. He stood there with coffee in his hand and offering a peace gesture. His eyes were red, tired. He said, can we talk? I stepped aside. He walked in, looked around, the small space, the simple furniture, the life I had been forced into. For the first time, I saw something in his face, not pity, not guilt, something close to discomfort. We sat. He didn't drink the coffee. He stared at it. He said, I didn't think you'd do this. I said, I didn't think you'd lock me out. He said, it's not personal. I said, it was. He rubbed his face. I was protecting what's mine. I said, you were claiming what wasn't. He looked up, sharp. You're not my father, I nodded. I never tried to be. He said, then why are you doing this? I held his eyes, calm, steady. Because you tried to erase me. He flinched. That was the word, erase. People don't expect their actions to be named so cleanly. He leaned back. She would hate this. I said, she would hate what you did. He opened his mouth, closed it. That's the moment when someone realizes their narrative isn't holding. He said quietly, I thought you'd just go. I smiled, not cruel, not kind, just honest. That's what you hoped. He looked down. The silence between us was thick. Not hostile, heavy. I said, you never asked what she wanted. He whispered, she wanted me safe. I said, so did I. He looked up again, confused. Then why? I said, because safety doesn't mean ownership. He stood. This is going to get ugly. I said, only if you make it. He hesitated at the door. You don't need to do this. I said, neither did you. He left without another word. The door closed, and something else closed with it, his certainty. From that moment on, he was reacting, not acting. That's a dangerous place to be. I received a call from the lawyer that evening. He's pushing back, he said. I said, he would. He said, he's emotional. I said, that's useful. The lawyer chuckled softly. You're very calm. I said, I'm very tired of being underestimated. Michael started making mistakes after that, small ones, sloppy ones. He contradicted himself in statements. He forgot dates. He misremembered conversations. Grief plus pressure does strange things to memory. He tried to rush things. Rushing reveals weakness. I watched it unfold with quiet focus. No anger, no celebration, just observation. He was unraveling, and he didn't even know why. That's the hardest kind of fall. When you don't understand the gravity pulling you down. I did. And I let it. Betrayal doesn't always shout. Sometimes it wears a clean shirt and a calm voice and calls itself practicality. That's what Michael called it. Practical, efficient, necessary. Those were his words when he explained to people why I was no longer around. He didn't say thrown out, he said transitioned. Language is a powerful tool. It can hide cruelty behind manners. Linda used to correct people gently. Say what you mean, she'd say. Words matter. Michael had learned the opposite. He had learned how to shape them. I hadn't always been a quiet man. When I was younger, I confronted things head-on, spoke fast, reacted fast, lost fast. Life teaches you the cost of speed. Linda was the first person who made me slow down. She was steady, observant. The kind of woman who noticed when someone's smile didn't reach their eyes. The kind who heard what wasn't said. When we married, we agreed on one thing above all else. No power games, no silent wars, no manipulation. We had both lived that life before. She told me about her marriage, about Michael's father. Charming, loud, demanding, the kind of man who filled a room but emptied people. She left when Michael was 12, not because she was weak. Because she was done. She raised him alone, worked 2 jobs, built stability with discipline and exhaustion. He grew up watching her struggle. That should have made him grateful. It made him entitled. He learned that the world owed him something. That's a dangerous lesson. When I entered their lives, he was already formed, polite on the surface, sharp underneath. He watched me like I was a temporary guest in a permanent home. I never challenged that. I never tried to assert dominance. I believed time would soften him. Time only sharpens what's already there. Linda saw it. She didn't say it often, but she said it enough. He keeps score, she once told me. I asked, of what? She said, everything. That stayed with me. Michael had a way of remembering every favor, every compromise, every perceived slight. He cataloged life. He measured. He compared. I had ignored that. I won't make that mistake again. After he left my apartment that day, the air felt different. Not lighter, clearer. There's a difference. Lighter means something has been removed. Clearer means something has been revealed. I knew then that the next phase would not be quiet. He had tried politeness. It failed. He had tried pressure. It failed. Next comes force, not physical, strategic. He started with public image. I heard through the cafe that he had been telling people I was having a breakdown. He told a neighbor I was confused. He told a colleague I was refusing to accept reality. He was building a narrative. Men like him always do. They prepare the audience before the performance. I didn't correct it. Letting someone underestimate you is a form of camouflage. I met with the lawyer again. He showed me transcripts, filings, responses. Michael's tone in the documents was defensive, emotional, imprecise. He was reacting, not planning. That's a mistake. The lawyer said, he's not thinking clearly. I said, he never does when he feels threatened. He raised an eyebrow. You know him well, I said, long enough. We went over Linda's notes again, her intentions, her worries, her trust. She had trusted me to protect her peace, even after she was gone. That's a responsibility most people don't understand. It's not romantic, it's heavy. I didn't want her son punished. I wanted him exposed. There's a difference. Punishment ends things, exposure teaches. Michael invited me to lunch the following week. Public place, neutral ground, control attempt. I agreed. He chose a restaurant near his office. Busy, bright, polished, power setting we sat. He ordered for both of us, assumed, old habit. I let him, he smiled, practiced. I've been thinking, he said. This doesn't have to be a fight. I said, it wasn't supposed to be. He ignored that. We can find a compromise. I said, you didn't look for one when you changed the locks. He shifted. I was emotional. I said, so was I. He leaned forward. I can give you some money, help you get on your feet. There it was, charity as control. I looked at him, calm, unblinking. I don't need your permission to stand. He stiffened. You're making this difficult. I smiled, soft. You started it difficult. He exhaled through his nose. You're trying to take advantage of a situation. I said, you're trying to own one. People nearby laughed. Forks clinked. Life went on. He was sweating. He wiped his hands on his napkin. He said, what do you want? That's the question men ask when they realize negotiation has shifted. I said, truth. He blinked. About what? I said, about her. He stiffened. Don't bring my mother into this. I said, you did when you locked me out of her house. He stood, abrupt, too fast, chairs scraped, heads turned. He lowered his voice. This is not over. I looked up at him, calm. It hasn't started. He left without paying. I covered the bill, some things you do out of principle, not pride. After that, his tactics changed. He began delaying, dragging, filing extensions, asking for continuances. Stalling is a sign of 2 things, fear and hope. Fear that you'll lose, hope that something will save you. He was waiting for something, I didn't know what. Yet, but I would. People always reveal their escape plan. I received a message from a mutual acquaintance. Michael says you're trying to steal his inheritance. I replied, Michael is trying to rewrite his. Silence. Another message came from a neighbor. Is everything okay? We heard some things. I replied, things are becoming honest. No one asked more. That's the power of calm. It doesn't invite argument, it ends it. One night I dreamed of Linda. She was standing in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, watching me the way she used to when she was amused. She said, you're being very patient. I said, I learned from you. She smiled. I woke up without heaviness, without anger, just focus. Michael was circling. I could feel it. And when people circle, they're either hunting or cornered. He stopped pretending after that lunch. That's usually how it goes. When charm fails, people reveal who they really are. The first thing he did was cut off contact with anyone connected to Linda. Old friends, neighbors, even distant relatives. He told them I was unstable, that I was harassing him, that I was trying to take advantage of his grief. He was isolating. It's a common tactic. If you control the narrative, you control the sympathy. I didn't confront him. I didn't correct him. I watched. Every lie requires maintenance, and maintenance creates patterns. Patterns create evidence. I received a call from an old friend of Linda's. Her voice was careful. Michael says you're not doing well. I said, I'm doing exactly as well as someone who was thrown out of his home would do. She paused. Then she said, that's not what he told us. I said, I know. Silence. Then quietly, I believe you. That's all I needed. Belief travels, slowly, but deeply. Michael didn't realize that the people who loved Linda would never fully trust someone who dismissed her husband. He had underestimated that bond. Just like he underestimated me, the next move was financial. He froze accounts, delayed transfers, questioned reimbursements. Anything connected to the old business he tried to block. He didn't understand the structure. He thought control meant access. He didn't know about layers. Linda and I had built redundancy into everything, for safety, for stability, for exactly this kind of uncertainty. I watched him struggle against walls he didn't know existed. That's a strange kind of power, the lawyer called. He's becoming erratic. I said, that's pressure. He said, he's claiming you manipulated her. I said, he's projecting. He sighed. This could get messy. I said, it already is, he just doesn't see it yet. Michael showed up at the apartment again. This time he didn't knock, he pounded. Hard, fast, angry. I took my time. When I opened the door, his face was tight. Jaw clenched, eyes sharp. He said, you're ruining my life. I said, you changed my locks. He stepped forward. You're doing this on purpose. I said, so did you. He laughed, short, bitter. You think you're smart. I said, I think you're careless. That hit him, I could see it. He pointed at me. She was my mother, I nodded. She was my wife, he flinched. You're not blood. I said, neither is decency. His breathing changed. Faster, shallower, that's the body preparing for loss. He said, you're going to regret this. I said, I already did when I trusted you. That ended it. He stared at me like he wanted to say something more. He didn't. He turned and left. That's what happens when people run out of script. The following week, the filings escalated. He accused me of undue influence, of coercion, of emotional manipulation. Every accusation was vague. Every claim was thin. But volume has its own effect. He was trying to overwhelm. That's a tactic, too. The lawyer leaned back in his chair. He's throwing everything. I said, because he has nothing. He nodded slowly. You're right. We began preparing responses. Not emotional ones, clean ones, clear ones, proof, documentation, timelines. Consistency is a quiet weapon. Michael began missing deadlines. That's when I knew he was losing control. Men like him live by structure. When structure breaks, so do they. I saw him one morning outside the courthouse, sitting on the steps, head in his hands. Alone. For a moment I felt something, not pity, recognition. That feeling when life teaches you something you didn't ask to learn. I didn't approach. Some lessons require solitude. That afternoon I received a message from his attorney, a request to discuss settlement options. I smiled. When the other side asks for discussion, it means they are no longer certain. We met. Neutral office, clean table, no emotion. His attorney spoke first, polished, controlled. My client is willing to explore compromise. I said, he had that chance. He leaned in. We can avoid a drawn-out process. I said, truth isn't drawn out, it's revealed. Michael sat beside him, quiet, stiff. Not looking at me, he was smaller, not physically, energetically. That matters. His attorney continued. There may be room for financial consideration. I said, I'm not for sale. Michael looked up, sharp. Then what do you want? I met his eyes. Accountability, he scoffed. For what? I said, for thinking you could erase me. Silence. The lawyer cleared his throat. Perhaps emotions are high. I said, perhaps character is low. Michael stood. This is pointless. I said, so was your decision. He froze, then he sat, slowly. That was new. He had never retreated before. The lawyer glanced between us. Let's take a break. We did. In the hallway, Michael finally spoke. You're enjoying this. I said, no, I'm enduring it. He laughed, but it was thin. You think you're teaching me something. I said, no, life is. He stared, long, hard. You won't win. I said, I already did. The day you showed me who you were. That stayed with him, I could see it. The meeting ended without agreement. That was fine. He was unraveling. That was better. Because when people unravel, they reveal everything they were hiding. And Michael was hiding more than he knew. I felt it. The way he avoided certain topics. The way he deflected certain questions. The way his attorney hesitated at specific points. There was something beneath the surface. And pressure brings things up, always. People don't hide things without reason, and they don't protect secrets unless those secrets can destroy them. Michael started changing his behavior after that failed meeting. Less aggression, more silence. He avoided eye contact in public, kept his head down. He had shifted from attack mode to defense mode. That's a dangerous transition, because defense always means fear, and fear makes people careless. I noticed he stopped using certain accounts. Certain patterns disappeared. Certain transactions went quiet. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when someone is trying to hide something. The lawyer noticed it too. He said he's inconsistent. I said he's scared. He raised an eyebrow. Of what? I said, of something he thought no one would see. We started reviewing everything again, not just what was filed, what was avoided, what was missing. Absence can be as loud as presence. Linda had once mentioned that Michael had trouble with money, not irresponsibility, entitlement. He believed resources were his by right, not by effort. She had worried about it. She had told me he doesn't plan, he assumes. Assumption is expensive. We traced a few irregularities, small at first, nothing dramatic, but patterns don't start loud. They start consistent, a transfer here, a delay there. An account opened, then closed. Not illegal on the surface, but unnecessary. Unnecessary things usually mean cover. I didn't rush, I never rush. The more patient you are, the more people reveal. Michael stopped going to the gym. Stopped posting, stopped being seen. Isolation is another sign. He was pulling inward, protecting something. I received a call from the lawyer one morning. His voice was different, focused. Alert. He said, we may have something. I didn't speak. I waited. He said, your stepson accessed funds that were not designated for him before your wife passed. I closed my eyes, not in anger and understanding. He continued. Small amounts spread out. Over time, I said he was testing. He said, yes, people test before they steal. They check if anyone notices. He said, it appears he assumed full control would never be questioned. I said, he assumed wrong. The lawyer paused. This changes things. I said, it clarifies them. Michael had been preparing long before Linda died. That realization hit hard, not because of betrayal, because of timing. He hadn't just taken advantage of her absence. He had anticipated it. That's not opportunistic. That's calculated. I didn't feel rage. I felt cold. When you realize someone was waiting for a moment like that, you don't get emotional. You get precise. We documented everything. Quietly, carefully, no accusations, no confrontation, just preparation. Michael didn't know, and that was perfect. He started making mistakes again. Bigger ones. He forgot to update a filing, missed a response window. Gave contradictory statements. Pressure was closing in, and he could feel it. He showed up at the apartment again. This time he looked tired, not angry, not aggressive, just worn. He stood in the doorway like a man who didn't know which side he belonged on. I didn't invite him in. I didn't turn him away. I waited. He cleared his throat. I need to talk. I said, you always do. He swallowed. This is getting out of hand. I said, you started it out of hand. He ran his fingers through his hair. I didn't think it would go this far. I said, neither did I when I trusted you. He flinched again. That word kept doing that. Trust, he said, we can end this. I said, you can. He frowned. How? I said, by telling the truth. He stared. About what? I held his eyes, long, calm, unmoving. About the money. His face changed, just slightly, but enough. That was confirmation. He laughed, too fast, too loud. What money? I said, the kind you assumed no one would count. Silence, real silence. The kind that doesn't perform, the kind that freezes. He looked away. I didn't speak. I let it sit. He said quietly, you don't know what you're talking about. I said, then you have nothing to worry about. He left, without another word, without another threat, without another accusation. That's when I knew. The pressure was working. The lawyer confirmed it 2 days later. He's nervous. I said, good. He said, he asked about settlements again. I said, that's fear talking. He said, he's trying to protect something. I said, he already lost it. Michael stopped fighting openly after that. He started avoiding. Avoiding meetings, avoiding calls, avoiding questions. Avoidance is confession without words. The court date was approaching, and he was unraveling. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. Linda had trusted me to be steady. And I was, not for revenge, for balance, for truth, for closure. Michael had wanted me gone, invisible, erased. Instead, he was becoming smaller, quieter, exposed, and he didn't even know how. That's the thing about quiet strategy. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives. And by the time you feel it, it's already too late. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives disguised as desperation. That's what I saw in Michael's eyes the next time I ran into him. Not anger, not arrogance, panic. The quiet kind that tightens the jaw and shortens the breath. He was losing control, and men like him don't lose control gracefully. They lash. He started by testing boundaries, calling late at night, hanging up. Driving past my apartment, parking across the street, sitting there, watching. I didn't react. I didn't draw the curtains. I didn't change my routine. Fear feeds on attention. I starved it. The lawyer warned me. He's becoming unpredictable. I said, that's when people make mistakes. He nodded. And mistakes create openings. Exactly. Michael's social mask was slipping. Friends stopped returning his calls. Colleagues started avoiding him. His reputation was shifting, not because of me, because of him. People feel instability, even when they can't name it. It makes them cautious. One afternoon, I heard raised voices in the hallway of his office building. I was there for paperwork, coincidence, or alignment. He was arguing with someone, a woman, sharp, controlled, furious. She said, "You promised." He said, "Not now." She said, "You don't get to decide that." I kept walking, but I listened. Promises, pressure, consequences. Patterns were forming. He was juggling too many things, and something was slipping. The lawyer called later that day. "We have confirmation." I didn't ask, he continued. The transfers were intentional, and he misrepresented their purpose. I closed my eyes, not from shock, from clarity. That meant fraud, not massive. But real enough. He said, "This escalates." I said, "It concludes." Michael began sending messages, apologies, half apologies, blame wrapped in regret. I didn't mean for things to go this way. This got out of hand. We're both hurting. When people say we in moments like that, they mean me. He was trying to reset the narrative. Too late, he showed up at my apartment again, this time with someone, a woman, early 30s, nervous, avoiding eye contact. He said, "This is my girlfriend." She nodded, weak smile. He said, "We just wanted to talk." I looked at her. Then at him, I said, "You brought an audience?" He shifted. She wanted to understand. I said, "Then you should tell her the truth." Her eyes flicked to him, sharp, questioning. He swallowed. "We're just going through some legal stuff." I said, "You threw me out of my home." Her head snapped toward him. "You said he left." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The truth has its own voice. She looked at him. "You didn't tell me that." He snapped. "It's complicated." I said, "It's simple." He glared at me. "You're doing this on purpose." I said, "You did this on purpose." She took a step back. "What else didn't you tell me?" He reached for her arm. She pulled away. That was the first visible fracture. Public, uncontrolled. He left with her in silence. I watched them go, not satisfied, just aware. Pressure was working. The court date loomed, and he was cracking. I received an anonymous message. No name, no greeting, just a sentence. "Check the storage unit." I stared at it for a long time. Then I smiled, because that's how things surface. Not with announcements, with whispers. The lawyer and I followed up, discreetly, legally. What we found didn't surprise me. It confirmed documents, personal items, Linda's things, things that should have been shared, things he had hidden, things he had planned to control. He had been preparing for this long before he admitted. That's what hurt, not the theft. The intention, the lawyer said quietly. He was anticipating her death. I said, he was counting on it. There's a difference. Anticipation is passive. Counting is active. That's a moral line, and he had crossed it. Michael stopped answering calls after that, stopped responding, stopped pretending. He had gone dark. That's when people either disappear or explode. I prepared for both. The lawyer prepared filings, amendments, evidence, quietly, carefully, no leaks, no threats, just readiness. Michael didn't know how close the walls were. He thought he still had room. He didn't. One evening I heard a knock at the door. Not loud, not aggressive, just there. I opened it. It was him, alone, no girlfriend, no posture, no armor. Just a man with tired eyes and shaking hands. He said, "We need to talk." I said, "You always do." He looked down. "I messed up." I said, "You chose." He swallowed. "I didn't think anyone would notice." I said, Linda did. His head snapped up. What? I said, she wrote about you. She worried. He flinched. Hard. I said, you weren't as invisible as you thought. He whispered, she loved me. I said, she trusted me. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he looked like a child. Not dangerous, not cruel, just small. I didn't comfort him. I didn't attack him. I let him feel it. That's respect. He said, I just didn't want to lose everything. I said, you lost yourself. He opened his eyes, red, wet. You're enjoying this. I said, I'm enduring it. Again, he shook his head. You think you're better than me? I said, I think I'm accountable. He laughed, broken. You don't know what it's like. I said, you don't either. He looked at me. Confused, I said, to be loved without condition. He stepped back as if the words had weight. They did. He left without another word, and I knew the fall had begun, not because I pushed, because he couldn't hold himself up anymore. Recklessness is what happens when fear outpaces control. Michael crossed that line the next morning. He started calling people he had cut off weeks ago. Linda's friends, old neighbors, distant relatives, anyone who might listen. He was trying to rebuild a bridge he had burned. Too late. When you destroy trust, you don't get to reconstruct it on your schedule. People told me, quietly, carefully, with concern in their voices. He called me. He sounded desperate. He asked about you. That last one always came with a pause. I said the same thing every time. He should have asked before he locked me out. No anger, no drama, just truth, the lawyer called. He filed an emergency motion. I smiled. Of course he did. Emergency motions are the legal equivalent of shouting. They don't make you right, they make you visible. He was trying to force the timeline. Force creates mistakes. We prepared our response. Calm, documented, heavy with evidence. No insults, no speculation, just facts. The strongest thing you can do when someone is panicking is stay composed. It unsettles them. He began showing up places. At the cafe, at the grocery store, at the post office. Always at a distance. Always watching, not stalking. Hovering, that's different. Hovering is uncertainty trying to look like control. I didn't change my routine. Predictability is power when you're not afraid. One afternoon, he finally approached me in public. Outside the cafe, broad daylight, people everywhere. He walked up too fast, too close. He said, you need to stop. I said, stop what? He said, this, all of this. I said, you started all of this. His jaw tightened. You're destroying everything. I said, you did that when you chose yourself over decency. He lowered his voice. I will make this ugly. I met his eyes, calm, steady. You already did. He clenched his fists. You think you're untouchable. I said, I think you're exposed. That did it. His face flushed. His breath shortened. That's the body preparing to fight or flee. He did neither. He stepped back, slowly, as if the ground had shifted. He said, you don't know what you're dealing with. I said, neither do you. He turned and walked away, fast. People watched. Some whispered, public pressure is a different kind of weight. It doesn't crush, it erodes. He began sending long messages, paragraphs, apologies mixed with blame, memories mixed with accusations. He was trying to rewrite history. I didn't respond. Silence is a mirror. It shows people what they're really saying. The lawyer warned me. He's spiraling. I said, spirals always end somewhere. He nodded. Usually badly. I said, usually truthfully. Michael missed another deadline, then another. Then he showed up late to a hearing, unshaven, unprepared. That's not strategy, that's collapse. The judge noticed. The room noticed. He was losing credibility, and credibility is everything. After that hearing, he confronted me in the hallway. No audience control, no performance, just raw. He said, why won't you just let this go? I said, because you wouldn't. He shook his head. You're ruining my future. I said, you gambled it. He laughed, bitter. You think you're teaching me a lesson? I said, no, I think you're learning one. He stared at me, long, hard, then softer. She wouldn't want this, I said. She wouldn't want what you did. He turned away. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't chase, it waits. The girlfriend left him that week. I didn't know until someone told me. She moved out. He's been calling her nonstop. She blocked him. I didn't react. Personal consequences are not my work, they're life's. He showed up at the apartment again that night. It was late. He looked hollow, not angry. Not defensive, empty. He stood there for a long time before speaking. I'm tired. I said, so am I, he nodded. This isn't what I wanted. I said, it's what you chose. He closed his eyes. I just wanted to feel secure. I said, security built on theft is temporary. He whispered, you don't understand. I said, I understand too well. He looked at me. Then why won't you stop? I said, because stopping now would teach you nothing. He flinched. I said, and she deserved better than that. He looked away. Tears came, not dramatic, quiet, uncontrolled. He wiped them, angrily, ashamed. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Some moments require space. He said, you're enjoying this. I said, I'm respecting it. He laughed, weak. That's not what this feels like. I said, that's because consequences don't feel fair when you cause them. He stared at the floor, then he said something I didn't expect. I was scared she'd leave me with nothing. I said, so you took everything. He nodded just once, small. I said, that's not protection, that's fear. He whispered, I know. He left, slowly, no anger, no threat, no posture. Just a man carrying the weight of his own choices. The lawyer called the next day. He's asking for continuances. I said, he's running. He said, he's out of options. I said, that's when people tell the truth. He paused. Or lie bigger. I said, either way it ends. And it was ending, not with explosions, not with shouting, with exposure. And exposure is the most uncomfortable ending there is. His final move wasn't loud. That surprised me. Men like Michael usually explode when they're cornered. He didn't. He tried something quieter, more dangerous. He tried to rewrite reality. The lawyer called early. He filed an affidavit. I said, about what? He hesitated. About your wife. That pause told me everything. He continued. He's claiming she was mentally unstable near the end. I closed my eyes, not in pain, in recognition. That's a line you don't cross unless you're desperate. He said, he's suggesting you manipulated her decisions. I said, he's accusing her of weakness to protect himself. The lawyer exhaled. Yes, that's the thing about people who panic. They reveal their values. He was willing to damage his mother's memory to save his position. That told me who he really was. I had always known. But now it was clear, documented, visible. We prepared the response. Carefully, with respect, with dignity, not for him. For her, Linda's medical records were clean, sharp, clear, no decline, no impairment. She had been strong until the end. He had no evidence, just narrative, and narrative collapses under proof. Michael didn't know what we had, he assumed. Again. That afternoon, I saw him outside the courthouse, pacing, talking to himself. Hands moving, eyes unfocused. People noticed. People always notice when something feels off. He was unraveling in public now. That's dangerous for someone who built his life on image. He approached me. No greeting, no pause. He said, you did this. I said, you did. He said, you're turning everyone against me. I said, you turned yourself. He clenched his jaw. She wouldn't want you to do this. I said, she wouldn't want you to lie. That word hit him. Lie. He flinched. I leaned in slightly, just enough for him to hear. And you're not very good at it. He stepped back, hard. As if I had pushed him, I hadn't. He said, you think you've won? I said, I think you've lost. He laughed, high, unstable. You don't know what I'm capable of. I said, neither did she, and that's the problem. His face changed. The mask slipped just for a second, and in that second I saw it, not anger, not fear, resentment, deep, old. He whispered, she chose you. I said, she loved us both. He shook his head. No, she chose you. That was it. That was the wound. That was the story he had been telling himself. Not that he lost a mother, that he lost a competition. I said, this was never a contest. He laughed, bitter. It always is. And that was the moment I knew. This had never been about property. It had never been about money. It had been about position, and he had never believed he deserved to share it. He walked away, fast, too fast. The lawyer watched him go. He's dangerous. I said, he's desperate. He nodded. That's worse. 2 days later, he made his final mistake. He contacted one of Linda's friends directly, an older woman, kind, trusting. He asked her to sign a statement, said it would help close things. She called me, confused. Upset, she said, he wants me to say she wasn't herself. I felt something tighten, not anger, resolve. I said, she was more herself than he will ever be. She was silent. Then she said, I won't do it. I said, thank you. She said, he sounded wrong. I said, he is. The lawyer added that to the file, attempted manipulation. Pattern, intent, it was stacking up. Michael didn't know. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was being strategic. He was being documented. He sent me one last message, just one line. You're going to regret this, I replied. One of us already does. He didn't respond. The court date arrived. The room was full, not crowded, but aware. People could feel the tension. Michael sat stiff, eyes darting, hands shaking. He avoided my gaze. That's not strength, that's fear. The judge began. The lawyers spoke. The documents were presented. The timeline unfolded, clean, clear, unemotional. Michael shifted, cleared his throat, adjusted his tie. Classic tells, then his attorney stood. He began with confidence. It didn't last. The questions came. The inconsistencies surfaced. The transfers were revealed. The affidavit was challenged. The medical records were introduced. The judge leaned forward. Michael's face drained, not dramatically, gradually, like color leaving something that can't hold it. Then came the storage unit. The items, the concealment, the planning. The judge looked at him, long, quiet, heavy. That look holds more power than any word. Michael stared at the table, didn't look up, didn't speak. His attorney whispered. He didn't respond. The judge asked him a question, simple, direct. "Is this accurate?" He didn't answer. The room held its breath. He swallowed, once, twice. Then he shook his head. Barely. That was it. That was the break. The judge said, "We will recess." Michael stood, too fast. The room spun. He reached for the chair, missed. His knees buckled. He tried to catch himself. He didn't. He went down, hard. The sound was wrong, the kind of sound that stops conversation. People stood. Someone called out. The bailiff moved. The judge rose. Michael lay on the floor, eyes open, not seeing. His mouth moved. No words came. The room was silent, not shocked. Stunned. I didn't move, not out of cruelty. Out of stillness. This was not my victory. This was his collapse. There's a difference. They called for help. They cleared space. They checked his pulse. He was breathing, but shallow, fragile, small. I watched, not with satisfaction, with distance. Because when a person falls under the weight of their own choices, the most respectful thing you can do is let gravity work. Collapse has a strange sound, not loud, not dramatic, just final. Michael's body hit the floor and everything else stopped. Conversations froze, papers hung in the air. Even the judge stood still for a moment, as if the room itself needed time to understand what had happened. People rushed. Someone knelt. Someone called for help. I stayed where I was, not because I didn't care. Because this was not my moment to move. This was his moment to face. They lifted him onto a stretcher. Oxygen, voices low and urgent. The girlfriend wasn't there, no family at his side, no one holding his hand. That image stayed with me, not as punishment, as consequence. The judge called recess. The room emptied slowly, quietly, no gossip, no drama. Everyone felt the weight. I stepped outside into the sunlight. It was too bright. That always happens after something heavy. The world doesn't adjust its lighting for human collapse. It just keeps going. The lawyer joined me. He didn't speak at first. Neither did I. We stood there. Two men watching a story change direction. Finally, he said, "That was unexpected." I said, "It was inevitable." He looked at me, curious. "You think so?" I nodded. "People can only carry lies for so long," he exhaled. "He'll be hospitalized." I said, "He already is." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I said, mentally. He didn't reply. The ambulance doors closed. The siren didn't scream, it hummed. Even emergencies can be quiet. I went home. Not relieved, not victorious. Still, there's a difference between winning and watching. I wasn't celebrating, I was observing. Michael didn't return to court that day, or the next. The lawyer informed me he was under medical observation, stress, exhaustion, possible panic-induced collapse. That phrase again. Panic. Panic is not weakness, it's exposure. When your internal story collapses, the body follows. He had been living in a fiction. He had been acting in a role he couldn't sustain. And when the script failed, so did he. I didn't contact him, I didn't visit, I didn't send messages. Some lessons need space. The lawyer continued the process, quietly, carefully, respectfully. The judge had seen enough. That matters. Judges are human. They notice patterns. They sense dishonesty. They recognize manipulation. Michael had shown all three. The filings proceeded. The narrative shifted, publicly. The truth doesn't need volume. It just needs time. I walked past the house again, still locked, still closed, still silent, but different. The air around it felt unsettled, like something was waiting to be corrected. Linda used to say, "Homes remember." I used to smile at that. I don't anymore. Michael's girlfriend reached out, not to me, to the lawyer. She had questions, concerns, doubts. That told me everything. When the people closest to you start questioning your story, the foundation is already cracked. The lawyer told me she's distancing herself. I said, "She's protecting herself." He nodded. "Smart." Michael had no one to lean on, and for the first time, he knew it. That's a hard realization, not because you're alone, but because you realize you built it that way. I thought about Linda, about the way she would sit quietly when Michael spoke too loudly, about the way she would change the subject when he grew sharp, about the way she protected him from himself. She had been carrying him longer than I realized. And now, there was no one left to do that. I didn't feel triumph. I felt sadness, not for him, for her. Because no mother should be repaid like that. The lawyer called again. "We're resuming next week." I said, "He'll be there." He hesitated. "We don't know." I said, "He will." Men like Michael don't disappear. They perform, even in collapse. Especially in collapse. He needed to be seen. He needed to be heard. He needed to regain position. That's how his mind worked. I prepared. Not with aggression, with clarity. I reviewed everything again, every document, every note. Every intention Linda had left behind. Her handwriting was steady, strong, unapologetic. She had been clear about me, about him, about her wishes. That gave me peace. Not because it favored me, because it told the truth. Michael returned to court pale. Thin, eyes hollow but upright. That surprised people. It didn't surprise me. Performance runs deep. He walked slowly, carefully, like a man afraid of falling again. He didn't look at me, not once. The judge acknowledged him. The process continued. No sympathy, no punishment, just procedure. That's how real justice works, not emotional, structured, relentless. His attorney spoke less, hesitated more. He was losing confidence. And confidence is contagious, so is doubt. The questions returned, the documents returned. The patterns returned. Michael sat still, too still. Hands clasped, knuckles white, breathing controlled. That's not calm, that's restraint. The judge asked him to clarify a statement. He opened his mouth. Paused, closed it. That pause mattered. The judge noticed. Everyone did. He tried again. His voice shook, just slightly, but enough. The truth has a way of shaking through lies. You can hear it. The judge leaned forward. Again, that look again, heavy, silent, judging. Michael looked down again. And in that moment, I saw it. Not fear, not anger, regret. Not for what he had done, for being caught. That's a different regret. And it's a dangerous one because it doesn't change you. It hardens you. I watched, quiet, still, unmoving, because this wasn't about me anymore. This was about who he was becoming and whether he could live with it. Michael was quiet for days before the next hearing. Not the kind of quiet that signals peace. The kind that hums with tension. Every message, every movement, every glance was calculated, or so he thought. But panic has its own language. It seeps out in small gestures. Fingers tapping, eyes darting, lips pressed tight. Small, insignificant to most, but loud if you are watching. I was watching. Not to gloat, not to punish, to understand. Because understanding is always the first step in quiet justice. The lawyer and I reviewed the case again. Evidence, testimony, documentation, witnesses, patterns of behavior, all lined up like dominoes. I didn't need anger. I didn't need shouting. I just needed the truth, and truth is patient. The hearing began. Michael appeared pale, exhausted, his hair disheveled, posture tight. Every step seemed heavy, weighted. He tried to look normal, but his eyes gave him away. The judge started with procedural questions. Simple, direct. Michael answered, short sentences, hesitant. The first document was presented, a small thing to an outsider. A bank statement. But to those who knew, it told a story. Transfers he had made without disclosure. Attempts to claim control, misrepresented authority. The judge frowned, made a note. Michael shifted in his seat. He tried to argue, but the words faltered. Volume does not equal power. Control does. The next witness was a mutual acquaintance. She had been asked to verify statements he made. Her voice was calm, steady. She didn't need emotion. She had the truth. Michael's lips pressed tight, his jaw clenched. He tried to interrupt, to redirect. The judge silenced him with a single look. That's the thing about authority. It doesn't argue, it observes, it corrects. Each question chipped away at the narrative he had built. Each answer revealed inconsistencies. I sat quietly, absorbing it all, not triumphantly, not coldly, just observing the natural consequences of choices. The lawyer leaned in. Whispered, "He's unraveling." I nodded. The court recessed. Michael walked out, shoulders slumped. The public eye followed, whispers, concern, curiosity. He didn't speak, not to anyone. His mask had slipped too many times, too publicly. Back at the apartment, I reflected on Linda. Her wisdom, her patience, her subtle understanding of people. She had known long before I did what kind of man Michael would become under pressure. And now the pressure was revealing it, not me. Not my doing, him. I realized then that quiet strategy isn't about winning against someone. It's about allowing truth to find its own path. The next day, Michael made another mistake. An affidavit he had filed hastily without reviewing details. It contradicted a statement made earlier. Small, yes, but patterns matter. The lawyer flagged it immediately. That will be critical, he said. I agreed. Michael's desperation was evident. He tried to call friends, leave messages, claim innocence, claim misunderstanding, all too late. The pattern was clear. Every attempt to cover the truth only revealed it further, and public perception matters. Neighbors, friends, associates, all had begun questioning him, some quietly, some openly. His credibility was crumbling. He wasn't thinking ahead. He was reacting, and reactions are weak. That evening, I received a message from someone who had known Linda for decades. She's watching, it said, not literally, not as a ghost, but her presence, her memory, her truth. It's heavier than any threat. Michael couldn't escape that. He tried to isolate himself further, but isolation doesn't erase mistakes. It only magnifies them. I didn't gloat. I didn't taunt. I simply prepared, observed, stayed calm, because the most effective revenge isn't loud, it's patient, measured, and morally justified. Michael began calling less, responding less, avoiding witnesses, avoiding scrutiny, avoiding reality. But reality has a way of catching up. And by now, he was just waiting for the next domino to fall. Which it did. During the following hearing, the small mistakes, the inconsistencies, the patterns, they all aligned, one by one, and he couldn't explain them away. The judge's questions became sharper, more pointed. Michael faltered. The public record, the truth, and his own actions trapped him. No shouting, no dramatics, just clarity, and clarity is merciless. He left the courtroom that day pale, silent, and alone. No one followed, no one spoke, he was exposed. And sometimes that is punishment enough. The next day, Michael didn't show up immediately. Not because he was absent, because he was calculating. People like him believe hiding buys time. It doesn't. It only delays consequences. The courtroom was calm when he arrived. Not loud, not dramatic, but the tension was heavy, palpable. I watched him walk in. Shoulders tense, hands clasped, face pale. He avoided everyone's eyes, even the judge's. That's the posture of a man who knows the ground beneath him has shifted. The hearing began. The judge reviewed evidence. Small discrepancies, documented timelines, witness statements, verified transfers, all quiet, all factual. Michael's responses were clipped nervous. He stumbled over phrasing, tried to explain contradictions, tried to deflect responsibility, but patterns cannot be deflected. Patterns are louder than words. One by one, the inconsistencies stacked against him. Every lie he tried to maintain collapsed under observation. Every half-truth he spoke only reinforced the evidence. I sat quietly, calmly, still. The lawyer whispered, "He can't hide anymore." I nodded. "He's cornered by his own choices." Michael's face twitched, not in anger, not in defiance, panic, desperation, the sort that erodes confidence. His attorney tried to intervene. Polished, calm, professional, but the cracks were visible. Michael flinched at each question, hesitated before each answer. And hesitation is the sound of exposure. The judge asked a simple, direct question. "Can you explain the purpose of these transfers?" He opened his mouth, closed it, stammered, tried again. His voice shook. The judge leaned forward, quiet, observing, waiting. Michael faltered. The courtroom held its breath. Silence has a gravity louder than any accusation. It forces truth to surface. I saw it then. The shift, not in the documents, not in the judge's notes. In him. The man who thought he could manipulate everyone around him was breaking under the weight of his own strategy. No one needed to point it out. He revealed it himself, a glance at his lawyer. A flinch at the witness, a pause too long, it was enough. The lawyer looked at me, subtle nod. The dominoes had fallen, and Michael was standing amidst the ruin. By the end of the hearing, it was clear. Not in dramatic pronouncements, not in anger, not in shouting, just in quiet observation. The judge made a ruling, limited, measured, legal, moral, accountability established, oversight restored. Michael was silent, not arguing, not pleading. He was confronted with the reality he had created, and that confrontation is heavier than any public embarrassment. Later, outside the courthouse, he stumbled slightly, eyes down, breathing shallow, not because I approached, not because anyone confronted him, because the consequences of your own actions are heavier than any external force. I walked past him, didn't speak, didn't look. He recognized the weight of truth, and he carried it alone. That evening I reflected on Linda, How she always said patience is stronger than aggression. How she taught me that justice doesn't have to shout. How quiet observation, clear evidence, and moral steadfastness create results no anger can match. Michael would have to live with the choices he made. That was the lesson, not revenge, not humiliation, accountability, quiet, patient, inescapable. And for the first time, I felt the calm settle in, not victory, not satisfaction, clarity. Because when truth is finally revealed, there's no need for noise, it speaks for itself. The courtroom was quieter than usual that morning, not tense, not expectant, just heavy with the weight of inevitability. Michael arrived, pale, careful, slower than before, every step deliberate, every glance measured. It wasn't arrogance, not defiance, it was caution. And caution is the sign of someone who has learned, at last, that actions have consequences. The judge called the session to order. Documents were presented. Evidence was clarified, transfers were traced, statements verified, witnesses spoke calmly, truthfully, without embellishment, each piece stacked logically, methodically, morally. Michael shifted in his seat, hands tightly clasped, knuckles white, jaw tense. He spoke when required, but the words came hollow. The judge listened, silent, unwavering. I noticed the smallest things. A twitch in his eye when a date was mentioned. A subtle hesitation before answering a question about a transfer. A shift in his posture when he realized the weight of verification. These were cracks. And cracks widen when pressure remains constant. The lawyer whispered, "He's realizing he can't recover from this." I nodded, not triumphantly, not coldly, just observing. Justice is not about vengeance, it's about clarity. It's about balance. A clerk brought forward an envelope. Michael's signature on it revealed his attempt to manipulate a witness. He hadn't intended to get caught, but caught he was. The judge's eyes narrowed, calm but firm. "Mister, this court takes such matters seriously." Michael swallowed. His Adam's apple moved visibly. He tried to respond. Words stumbled, deflections surfaced, but the judge was steady, calm, observant. The courtroom air shifted. Even the spectators felt it. No shouting, no drama, just accountability. One witness spoke next, a longtime friend of Linda's. She described the care, the patience, the guidance Michael had received. How Linda had tried to teach him right from wrong, how she had shielded him from his own mistakes. Her words weren't condemnations. They weren't gloating. They were truth, and truth carries weight. Michael's shoulders slumped imperceptibly. The lawyer leaned over and whispered, "He's listening." Not in agreement, not in surrender, just acknowledging. Even that is a step, a small step. The judge reviewed the evidence again, not with anger, not with disdain, just precision. Transfers unaccounted for, affidavits misrepresented, statements inconsistent, oversight required. Simple, measured, clear. Michael's face paled further, no theatrics, no yelling, just clarity confronting him. Later, outside the courtroom, people murmured. Observers, friends, colleagues. None spoke directly to him, none needed to. The consequences were visible, not in humiliation, not in punishment, but in loss. Loss of control, loss of narrative. Loss of trust, that is heavier than any confrontation. Michael walked slowly to his car. Alone, silent, I watched from a distance, not to taunt, not to gloat, to witness the natural course of choices. The lawyer turned to me. "It's over." For now, I nodded, not relieved, not triumphant, calm, observant, balanced, because justice doesn't scream, it arrives, and it doesn't need applause. Back at the apartment, I sat in quiet, reviewed documents, notes, correspondence. Linda had left clarity behind, not instructions driven by anger, but guidance rooted in moral understanding. The decisions I made weren't for revenge. They were for truth, for fairness, for honoring her memory. Michael would carry the consequences of his actions. Not because I forced them, because he created them. And when people realize that truth is patient, precise, and undeniable, it changes them. Some permanently, others temporarily. He had already begun the change. Small cracks, hesitations, recognition of responsibility. They're subtle, easily overlooked, but they matter. Because that is how real justice unfolds, not in fury, not in chaos, but in quiet consequence, and quiet consequence is unstoppable. Michael tried to regain composure, but composure was a stranger to him now. Every step he took in the courthouse was tentative, careful, as if the floor itself might betray him. And in a way, it already had. He had built his own collapse. The judge called the next set of witnesses. One by one, their statements unfolded like a map of truth. No embellishment, No drama, just facts, timelines, confirmed intentions. Michael flinched at each detail. Even when the witness didn't look at him, he knew the words cut through his story. Patterns are cruel that way. They reveal what you've tried to hide. The lawyer whispered to me, "He's realizing he can't spin this." I nodded. Realization is heavier than accusation. It weighs on a person until they can't ignore it. Michael tried to speak, attempted to offer explanations, each one weaker than the last, each one undermined by evidence. And as the hearing stretched on, fatigue began to settle in. Not exhaustion from effort, but exhaustion from facing unavoidable truth. People noticed it in the courtroom, not the spectators, not the judge, not the lawyer, himself. He avoided his own reflection in glass doors, in polished surfaces, because he didn't recognize the man staring back. The affidavit he had filed, attempting to manipulate testimony, was challenged. Every contradiction highlighted. Every misrepresentation noted. Michael's defenses faltered. His words became defensive, vague, hesitant. The judge's calm scrutiny left no room for performance, no room for lies, only exposure. During recess, he left quietly. Not in defeat, not in escape, just in recognition. I knew then he understood. He had lost not to me, not to anyone, but to himself, and the law, and truth. That evening, the lawyer reviewed final preparations for the closing statements. Michael had tried to regain footing, but every attempt reinforced his miscalculations. The truth was now undeniable, unavoidable, structured, documented. No emotion could change it. No anger could reverse it. The lawyer said, "He's fractured publicly and privately." I agreed. Fracture is a natural consequence of ignoring reality. The next day, Michael returned. Alone, pale, silent, no defiance, no bravado, the court was calm. He presented himself as required. The judge's presence didn't intimidate him. It reminded him of the boundaries he had crossed, reminded him of the trust he had broken, reminded him of consequences he could not escape. As testimony continued, he didn't try to argue. He didn't try to manipulate. He barely moved. Every word from witnesses, every document, every verified transfer weighed on him, and he felt it. He couldn't ignore it. The audience noticed it too. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the subtle signs of a man confronting the full measure of his actions. Even his lawyer hesitated before speaking, careful not to unravel what was already fragile. Michael realized the story he had tried to control was no longer his. The narrative had shifted. The truth was clear, immutable, inescapable. And yet he did not resist anymore. He no longer tried to perform. No attempts to manipulate the narrative, just a quiet acknowledgement of what he had done. I watched him in silence, not in triumph, not in satisfaction, but with understanding, because people like him are hardest on themselves. And justice, when it arrives quietly and fully, teaches them the most enduring lesson. The lawyer whispered, "He's ready to negotiate responsibly." I didn't reply, because readiness is internal, and it can't be forced. Michael would have to confront himself fully. That confrontation was the beginning of accountability, not punishment, not vengeance, accountability. And in the quiet of that courtroom, the truth had claimed its ground. Michael's posture changed subtly. No relief, no pride, just recognition, and recognition is the first step toward change. When the hearing ended for the day, he walked out slower than usual, not in defeat, not in escape. Just a man coming to terms with the weight of his own decisions. And in that stillness, I felt it too, the balance restoring itself, not because I acted harshly, not because I sought revenge, because patience, evidence, and moral clarity always have the final word, and Michael was beginning to hear it. The final hearing day arrived quietly. No announcements, no dramatics. Just the weight of inevitability settling over the courtroom. Michael entered alone, slow, deliberate, every step measured, every glance avoided. Even his attorney seemed subdued. The judge called the session to order. Evidence was revisited. Timelines confirmed. Witness statements verified. Patterns established. No shouting, no exaggeration, just clarity. Michael answered when required, short sentences, hesitant, measured. Even the smallest gesture, his eyes shifting, hands gripping the table, revealed the internal reckoning. He wasn't defiant. He wasn't aggressive. He was exposed. The judge spoke clearly, without flourish, without judgment beyond the facts. Transfers were unauthorized, misrepresentations documented, witnesses confirmed the narrative. Oversight and accountability are required. Simple, measured, final. Michael swallowed hard. He nodded once. No protest, no argument. Just recognition, the weight of his choices settling over him like a shadow he could no longer ignore. Outside the courtroom, people whispered quietly. Colleagues, friends, observers, not about shame, about inevitability, about consequences meeting truth. Michael's shoulders were tense, his eyes down, not hiding from others, hiding from himself. That evening, the lawyer and I reviewed the final documents. Michael had conceded minor points, not out of surrender, out of understanding. Understanding that truth cannot be bent, twisted, or erased. I thought of Linda, her patience, her guidance, the calm wisdom she carried in every choice. She had prepared me for this, not by teaching revenge, by teaching observation, clarity, justice. Michael had created the path. He was now walking it, not with anger, not with humiliation, with accountability. The lawyer said, "This will be sufficient." He has acknowledged oversight. He cannot ignore it now. I nodded. Satisfaction, not really. Clarity, absolutely, because justice doesn't scream, it doesn't celebrate, it aligns, it restores balance. I walked past the apartment that night, silent, closed, still. Different now, the air felt lighter, calmer, not because someone suffered, because truth was acknowledged. Michael would carry his choices, and that weight is heavier than any court ruling. People change when they confront the full measure of their own actions, even if reluctantly. That is the most enduring form of justice, and in that quiet I felt peace, not triumph, not victory, peace. The apartment was quiet that morning, not the kind of quiet that emptiness brings, the kind that settles after storms. I sat in the living room, a cup of coffee in hand, thinking about everything that had happened. Michael's collapse. The court hearings, the documents, the truths revealed. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just reflection. The lawyer called to update me. All formalities are complete, oversight in place, accountability acknowledged. I said nothing, because the moment wasn't for celebration. It was for understanding. I thought of Linda, of the way she had always believed in measured action, not anger, not vengeance, but careful observation, clarity, patience. Her presence, even in absence, guided me. I realized then that revenge is fleeting, justice is enduring. Michael would have to live with his choices, and that would teach him more than anger ever could. I took a walk outside. The neighborhood was calm, the sun soft. Neighbors waved, people moved about their routines. Life continued, and it always does. Michael's lessons would unfold quietly, not loudly, not publicly. The courthouse would be just another building to him soon, but the consequences were internal, permanent. That evening I received a call from someone who had been close to Linda. She would be proud, they said. I paused, not in disbelief, not in doubt, but in gratitude, because her wisdom had guided everything. Sometimes the most powerful actions are the ones you do quietly, without spectacle, without dramatics. The day passed slowly. I reflected on patience, on observation. On calm, the truth has its own rhythm, and when followed it finds its way. Michael wouldn't like it, he might even resent it, but he would learn from it. That is the work of morality, not punishment, not revenge. Learning, accountability. Growth. The evening settled. The sky darkened softly. I thought about silence, how it can hold more weight than shouting, how it can teach more than argument. I sipped my coffee slowly. Let the warmth fill me. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the quiet peace of completion. The storm had passed. The consequences had settled, and life continued. The days that followed were slow, measured, ordinary. Michael did not call, did not visit, did not attempt to challenge what had already been settled. It was as if he had finally understood that some mistakes are too heavy to undo. I walked through the neighborhood each morning, observing life. People moving, talking, laughing. Small routines, small victories. It reminded me that justice doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly. I reflected on how anger tempts us to act immediately, to shout, to retaliate. But calm, careful patience, guided by truth, carries a weight far beyond fleeting emotion. I thought of Linda. She had always said that character is revealed not when everything is easy, but when challenges test your integrity. Michael's reckoning had been forced by his own choices. I had not pursued him. I had not set traps. I had only remained steady, observant, and truthful. That steadiness revealed more than confrontation ever could. Neighbors began to notice the shift too. No one spoke directly of Michael. No one needed to. His absence was a presence in itself, a reminder of the consequences of pride, of deception, of selfishness. The lawyer checked in occasionally. All documents finalized, he's compliant, oversight is in place, no further disputes expected. I thanked him quietly, because the law is a tool, but morality carries a deeper weight. I spent time at home, reviewing letters Linda had left behind. Notes about life, guidance for decisions, reflections on patience and kindness. Even in absence, she had taught lessons that were still unfolding. I realized that revenge isn't a goal. Justice isn't a goal, peace is. And peace comes when truth has been acknowledged and accountability is carried, not out of anger but out of integrity. Michael's absence became a quiet relief. Not because I wished him harm, because the tension, the uncertainty, the waiting had finally ended. The weight he carried would teach him lessons I could not. Life has a way of enforcing its own rules when people ignore morality. I reflected on my own choices too, how I had remained calm, how I had resisted anger, how I had relied on patience, observation, and careful action. It was not always easy. Sometimes the temptation to act immediately was strong. But restraint preserves dignity, even in the face of betrayal, even in the shadow of loss, even when the world seems unfair. I watched the sunset that evening, quiet, gentle, unchanging. It reminded me that life moves forward, that consequences, when allowed to unfold naturally, teach more than punishment ever could. I thought of Michael one last time that day, not with hate, not with anger, but with recognition that the path he had chosen had its own weight, and that he would carry it alone. And sometimes, letting people carry the weight of their own choices is the greatest mercy and the clearest lesson.